So, good morning, everyone. And let us carry on where we left off yesterday, mid-sentence, as was pointed out by dear Ayupa, which is how it often has to be, because these things are quite involved, and there's a lot of information sometimes in a very short passage, and so it needs to be kind of unpacked and pointed out what these things really refer to. So this is one of the things about the word of the Buddha, the way the Buddha talks about the Dhamma. He says it is svakato, which means like well proclaimed. Yeah, he says that there is nothing missing and there's nothing superfluous. He says that these things are considered very carefully when he gives these explanations. And for that reason, when you read these words, actually every word may be significant. Every word is likely to be there for a particular reason. And so good to consider carefully what is being said. And this is, I think, one of the differences between the word of the Buddha and many contemporary or historical teachers. Contemporary and historical teachers, they are more kind of florid and more interesting and more poetic and more nice, and lots of nice things to be said about historical and contemporary teachers, but nobody really has that consistency, coherence, brevity, carefully thought out words and phrases as you find in the suttas. The suttas are unique in the way they are presented in terms of a precision regarding the Dhamma. And for that reason, it is important to consider it carefully. And it's very easy to be taken kind of along with the beauty of certain contemporary teachers and think, wow, this is really nicely put. A famous Buddhist poet called Ashvaghosha, for example, who writes these beautiful poems about the Buddhist life. But actually, you're moving away from the Dhamma at that point, and you're moving towards, kind of sensory indulgence almost at that particular point. So this is one of the things that makes the word of the Buddha kind of special. So anyway, having made a brief made a case for my going so slowly, so there you are. So yesterday we saw how we start out, with the breath meditation, how it has to be done in seclusion, and usually it is done when you sit down cross-legged. This is already kind of useful information right there. And the next one, the Buddha says here, he sets his body straight, ujjukaya panidaya. And so this, as you may notice, when you sit straight, usually the mind is more clear. And that is what is going on here. It supports the clarity of the mind. This does not mean that when you sit down, you should straight away kind of necessarily sit straight, because sometimes you may feel tired, and if you try to force the clarity of the mind, then that also is going to be problematic. And so sometimes you just chillax, you lean against the wall, or you take it easy, and then when the mind is ready, then often the body will straighten almost by itself. So you know the right time for these things. Lots of monks and people I know, they start off by leaning back and relaxing, watching the mind, knowing when the mind is ready. These are the sort of things that you pick up over time as you observe yourself, and then you know the right time. Now the straightening up is appropriate. It will help the clarity. Before a certain point, it will just help you to get tense, but after a certain point, it will help the clarity. So you have to know the right time for these things. So ujjukaya panidaya, I think the Pali is. And then when all of these things are in place, then you have the really critical one. You establish this mindfulness in front of them, or you establish mindfulness in front of you. This is the critical thing. And the Pali here is such. It is called an absolutive in Pali grammar. It means that this is to be done first. So the literal meaning is something like having established mindfulness in front of you. So in other words, having done this, then you do the meditation. There is a sequence here of events. It is not like, they come all at the same time or whatever. And this is really interesting, because very often For example, Satipatthana is often translated as the foundations of mindfulness. This is kind of a classic translation, has been used by lots of prominent translators in the past. And I consider it a wrong translation. And the reason why it is wrong, because when you say a foundation for mindfulness, you seem to be saying that this is what creates mindfulness. Yeah, this Satipatthana is the foundation. Okay, so you do it to become mindful. That's why you do Satipatthana. That's kind of the implied meaning in that way of phrasing it. But that is not what is happening. You don't really use it so much to create mindfulness. You use it more like you create mindfulness first, and then you apply that mindfulness to the meditation object. These are very different things. In other words, you cannot really do Satipatthana or mindfulness of breathing, which is just one way of doing Satipatthana. You can't do it until mindfulness is clear. Why? Well, because before you have mindfulness, the mind is not really steady. It is kind of a bit all over the place. It's not really present. It's a bit in the past, a bit in the future, a bit blurred, a bit out of control, a bit sloth and torpor, a bit kind of restless. Yeah, it is not really able to stay with the breath. And because it's not able to do it, it means you have to apply force. And if you apply force, the meditation is going to become unpleasant very quickly. And so if you want a natural process where you can really enjoy the meditation, where it happens kind of by itself in a natural progression, then mindfulness has to be set first. So this is what this is saying. Establish the mindfulness, then do the meditation on the breath. You find exactly the same thing in the Satipatthana Sutta. In the Satipatthana Sutta, it says that you have to be sattima. Yeah, this is kind of the introductory passage. Sattima atapi sampajano vinaya loke abhijjadomanasa. This is kind of the introductory part to the Satipatthana Sutta. And sattima there means mindful. And so that qualifies the state of mind that you're supposed to have while you meditate. Yeah, being mindful, you do the Satipatthana practice. It's exactly the same thing. Establish that first, then the meditation happens. And so this is quite clear from the suttas, and yet it is often misunderstood. Sometimes you go on a meditation retreat and they put you down and sit and they say, watch the breath. Well, actually, that's completely wrong already. First, establish mindfulness. That's what really is the right approach. Then, when mindfulness reaches the appropriate level, that is when you watch the breath, or you do the body contemplation, or the metta, or whatever else that you want to do. So this is really significant, and it changes your way of thinking about meditation practice. Now, this is both useful, and it can also be a bit frustrating, because sometimes the mindfulness may not come that easily. So for that reason, you also need to know, well, how do we establish this mindfulness? What is really the way to do this? And the answer is many of the things I was mentioning before. Yeah, you have to let go of the past and let go of the future. That's obviously part of this. How do we let go of the past? Well, you usually just have to forgive, because a lot of the thinking about the past may involve people, maybe some unpleasant situations or whatever. So you have to forgive the past. You have to understand that everyone in the world is worthy of forgiveness, including yourself, of course. First of all yourself, and then everyone else as well. So forgive. Why? Because we are like these robots driven by programs laid down in the past. All this conditioning in the past, like a program making you go in a certain direction. And if you are like a robot running on a program, of course, it means how much responsibility do you have? Virtually zero. And so you should always forgive yourself. And this is kind of one of those really critical things. So then, through that, then the past. Okay, let go of the past. Then let go of the future. Why let go of the future? Because actually there's nothing really interesting in the future anyway. Future is kind of boring, more of the same. Sorry. It's true though, isn't it? When I talk about the future, I don't mean the future in the spiritual sense. Of course, in the spiritual sense, we all have an interesting future. But what I mean is the future we think about, the future that the mind obsesses about. And that future is always the future in the world. It's the future of work, the future of, where society is going, the future of politics, the future of the climate. All of that future is what I'm talking about. And that future is not interesting because it's more of the same. Just more wars, more bit of peace, then problems in the family, and then a bit of harmony in the family, and then dying, and then getting reborn. It's the same. It's not interesting. There's nothing there. And yet somehow we think that is interesting. What is really interesting is the spiritual path, because there is a real future. There is real progress. There is a real goal. In life, there is no real goal. Just again and again and again, the same thing revolving around. It's really depressing when you think about it. Please don't get depressed, but it is depressing anyway. It's no need to get depressed because we have the spiritual path, and that is kind of what allows us to see the world with more clarity because we have a solution. If you have no solution, then seeing the world for what it actually is, it's kind of terrible, right? Of course, people get a bit depressed if they have to deal with all these negative things all the time. And so this is kind of this is why it becomes possible for us to see the truth, because we have something else we can lean on. And this is the idea of a refuge in the world. It allows greater clarity at the same time. So this is how you let go of the future and the past. And we can see that all of these things, we do it when we sit down and we just lean back and we wait. We incline our minds a little bit in the way I'm suggesting now towards forgiveness, towards not being interested in the future, and also not fantasizing in the present, because that also doesn't lead you anywhere useful. And then the mind hopefully kind of, something happens in the mind. You kind of wait and you enjoy just whatever is here. You enjoy the peace, you enjoy the good company, you enjoy the gratitude about the past, all of these things, and things start to happen. But sometimes it doesn't work. And the reason why it doesn't work is because even the ability to let go of the future of the past is not easy. It takes time to get your mind around how this actually works. It takes time to understand, how do I look at other people? How do I avoid getting upset with other people? I'm going to talk about this much more later on this retreat, because it's incredibly important on the spiritual path to have that good connection to everyone in the world, including those people who abuse you or whatever. Someone is shouting in your face or whatever, still you are able to somehow, okay, actually this is your problem, not mine, or whatever. And but this takes time to develop these perceptions. So a lot of this thing with giving rise to mindfulness in the here and now, on a retreat or in daily life or whatever, depends on how we live our lives. It depends on everything you do during the year. You come on this do one or two retreats a year. Well, everything else is enormously important for how you're able to use your time on these precious occasions when you go on retreat. And so that is why we need this kind of very broad outlook on the spiritual path. Everything in life should be included into the spiritual practice. Work, family, communities, everything that we do basically gets included in that. And then you're going to be on the right track. And all of that is basically the first 6 factors of the Noble Eightfold Path. This is what you develop, during your kind of ordinary life outside of meditation and retreats. And so that becomes then the support for everything else. And that is how mindfulness becomes established, by developing those first 6 factors. And then when you come on retreat, you lean on all of that hard work you have done outside. You sit back, you wait, you're patient, and then the mind, lo and behold, becomes mindful. Wow, I can see more clearly here. I know what's going on. I have this ability just to relax and watch the breath or whatever. So establish mindfulness first, and once it is established, then meditation starts to happen. So how does this work in practice? How do you know that there is enough mindfulness? How do you know? And this is kind of where you have to learn bit by experience. Because sometimes we don't even know what real mindfulness is, because we have never experienced real clarity of the mind. And so this is where you have to experiment a little bit, and see, and when does it work? And this again is about the idea of contemplating at the end of the meditation. Why did it work this time? Why did it not work this time? And by looking at that, you start to see what mindfulness means, what a clear mind actually is. What the right inclination of the mind is, the right intention. All of these things become clear to you as you contemplate your experience again and again. And then you're able to find that elusive middle way, which is the Noble Eightfold Path. Okay, so you establish this mindfulness in front of you. So where is this in front of you business? What does that mean? Does that mean like far away in front of you? What does it mean exactly? And it's one of those things that it's very hard to actually pin down this word. Parimukkang satting upatapetva. Parimukkang is the word which is rendered as in front of you. And mukha means like face or mouth. Pari usually means like around. So the basic idea seems to be like round and about the face or the mouth or something like that. It's not very clear. Traditionally in Buddhism, it is said to be the tip of the nose. And the reason why that is said is because in the commentaries it says nas agga. Nas agga. Agga is tip. Nasa, just like same word as nose. Nasa. Nese in Norwegian. Nose in English. Ne in French. It's all the same word. Ding, this one here. Ding, ding, ding. So that's why normally we think of it in that way. But actually, that is not necessarily true. It's not necessarily wrong, but it may be narrowing it down too much. You can't take a broader idea. So a broader idea would just be that you are present. You are here. You are in this time, in this space. Your mind is not somewhere else. So it is in this time and this space in front of you. It's basically what it means. Time and space should be here, not somewhere else. Yes.
Ajahn Brahm said that this phrase should translate it as make mindfulness the first priority, the most important thing.
Yeah.
How does that involve in this?
Obviously, yes, that's obviously true. It should be a priority. I think that's obviously the case. Whether parimukkang, but I don't think parimukkang actually itself means priority. I think it's just a way of talking about the general idea of meditation. It should be a priority. There are other words that are more likely to mean priority. I would say parimukkang probably means in this time and space. That's more likely the meaning. But so priority is more like his way of it's his way of explaining the meditation process. I mean, it's not wrong for sure, but I don't think it's the exact meaning of this one here, in my opinion. Pramukha. Pramukha would be a Sanskrit word then.
Ajahn was connecting
Pramukha. That would be pamukha. Pamukha, I think, in Pali. Pramukha, yeah. What, I don't know what that word is. I don't think that word exists in Pali, pramukha, because the PR constellation, P with R, is always a Sanskrit constellation. You don't find that in Pali. Yeah, because Sinhala is often based on Sanskrit. So that's kind of the reason. Yeah. It means what? Yeah. Major.
Even in Thai, it means leader of the
Leader.
country.
Leader. Okay. Yeah.
So Pramukh means really the head.
That's where Ajahn Brahm gets it from Thai. That's right. That's where he gets it from. Okay, now it makes sense. Yeah. Otherwise, because I was wondering where does he get this Sanskrit word from? Because Pramukh. Okay, but I don't think it is the same word as parimukha. That's the problem. It's a different word, and so that's why it doesn't really. But as a priority, yeah. Anyway, it's right, but it's not necessarily a translation of parimukha, and I think this is the thing. But anyway, yeah. Okay, and then finally, when mindfulness is established, then just mindful, you breathe in. Mindful, you breathe out. After all of this messing around, there's no breathing so far. So please don't forget to breathe, otherwise you're going to be in trouble. But so you breathe, but you don't not really. The breath is not entirely clear. The breath comes and goes a little bit. The breath is not what you focus on until this point. Yeah, the breath is kind of just there as a part of the background of what is going on. And this is a difference. People ask when to start watching the breath. Well, the breath is always around there somewhere, even just during a work day. Sometimes you may suddenly become aware of your breath because it's part of nature, part of reality. It doesn't mean you're doing breath meditation just because you are aware of it occasionally. But at this point is where the actual meditation really happens and where the ability to focus happens. Now you're mindful. That means you have the ability to stay with the breath. That's why now, just mindful, they breathe in, mindful, they breathe out. And it's kind of interesting here. You have this little word, just. I like to point this out. This is a little tiny, miny word in the Pali, eva in Pali. And eva has this meaning of just. It can also be like an intensifier. So sometimes you see the translation, ever mindful, you breathe in, ever mindful, you breathe out. But that translation doesn't make any sense because ever is an intensifier. It means like you are always mindful or really mindful or whatever. So that doesn't make any sense because at this point you're just starting out. So eva here quite likely has this other meaning, which is just. So just mindful you breathe in, just mindful you breathe out. So what might that mean? And the way to understand this, we'll understand this in the context of the next sutta we're going to have a look at. If we ever get to that sutta, that's a big question. We may just be content with the first sutta on this retreat because we're going slowly. So I hope no one is expecting to do all of these suttas. Anyway, we'll see what happens. I'm just being silly. Well, we should get pretty far with them, I think. But anyway, that's so in the context of the next sutta, the idea of just mindful, the meaning is, I think, that you don't do anything else except being mindful. You don't try, you don't force yourself, you don't use the willpower. There's no need to use willpower, you're just mindful. The moment you start to use willpower in a meditation, you can start to feel it becomes unpleasant. You can't relax anymore. Willpower and relaxation are almost two opposite things. As long as you use willpower, full relaxation is almost impossible. And so the contemplation or the observing of the breath should be natural. It should be because you are interested in the breath. It sounds almost paradoxical. How can you be interested in the breath? The most boring object in the history of... No, it's not boring. That's the whole point. It's peaceful. It's nice. It's pleasant. This is why we have to make the breath peaceful, nice, pleasant, joyful, all of these things, because that enables us to focus on this. And so one of the very important things for anyone who wants to do meditation practice like breath meditation is actually to learn how to see the delightful side of the breath. The delight is always there, but you have to see it, you have to focus on it, you have to notice it, you have to ask yourself, where is the delight in the breath? And then as you ask yourself that and you start to discover it, that is when it becomes more attractive. And we live in a times when, where this idea of being peaceful and still with something simple is very difficult in the modern world because we are used to all of this instant gratifications with the internet and iPhones and what have you. It's actually very hard to kind of put those things aside. Our mind becomes very easily distracted because of that. And so it's almost like we need to relearn the simple joys. The simple joys are far more interesting and powerful and take you much further than all of this kind of stupid, superficial joy that we have in ordinary life. So please notice that. Please see what is going on in the meditation. Understand how powerful and important this is and how it really it gives you a sense of profundity and depth that otherwise you would not find. And so, just mindful, you breathe in. Just mindful, you breathe out. And no need to apply any willpower. No need to try very hard. It just happens. And that's when meditation becomes so nice, when it just happens by itself. And you just relax and you sit back, just enjoying what is going on. So that is the introduction to mindfulness of breathing. This is kind of the background. And as so often, that background is probably the most important instructions here. And the reason why they are the most important instructions is because this is where you kind of do a little bit. This is where you apply the mind a little bit. This is where you nudge the mind a little bit. Yeah, in daily life, sometimes you have to sort of say, okay, let me think this way instead of that way. Let me do this instead of doing that. So it's a little bit of doing in the way we practice the first 6 factors of the Noble Eightfold Path. But at this point, it starts to become automatic. And so there's like a shift going on here. So now we're coming to the meditation, which then is largely automatic. And for that reason, now you just enjoy. So the next 16 steps are more like sitting back and waiting for these things to happen and also allowing them to happen. So now we come to the classical 16 steps of mindfulness or breathing here. So this is more like the exciting part. All the foundational stuff may sound very boring. It was very important. But what comes out of that foundation is really exciting and really interesting here. So let us have a look at this. So starting at the beginning, breathing in heavily, I'm breathing in heavily. Breathing out heavily, I'm breathing out heavily. When breathing in lightly, I'm breathing in lightly here. Breathing out lightly, I'm breathing out lightly here. They practice like this, or you practice like this. I will breathe in, experiencing the whole body here. You practice like this. I will breathe out, experiencing the whole body here. You practice like this. I'll breathe in, stilling the physical process. You practice like this. I will breathe out, stilling the physical process. So this is the first. These are the first 4 steps of mindfulness of breathing, and as we shall see later on, or shall we? I'm not sure if we shall. Shall we? Yes, we. No, we shall not see it later on. So I will tell you now. This is equivalent to the contemplation of the body in the Satipatthana Sutta, the Kaya Nupassana in the Satipatthana Sutta. So the mindfulness of breathing is divided into 16 steps, 4, 4, 4, and 4. 4 times 4, 16. And each group of 4 is equivalent to one of the Satipatthanas. So this is equivalent to the first Satipatthana, body contemplation, Kaya Nupassana. Maybe body contemplation, Kaya. The word Kaya is very interesting. It's one of these words that's hard to really pin down. The second one is contemplation of feelings, Vedananupassana. Third one, Chittanupassana, contemplation of mind. Last one, Dhammanupassana, which is difficult to translate, but maybe a contemplation of principles. That's Bhante Sujato's rendering, which is interesting because it has mostly to do with causality and that kind of thing. That's why principles is a nice translation here. So these are the 4, so they relate to each of the 4. And what is interesting about this is that it is progressive. So from seeing it here, that is also, in a sense, progressive in the Satipatthana Sutta. The most basic one is the contemplation of the body, and then you move on to feeling, then mind, and eventually to causality. There's a progress there. And within the contemplation of the body itself, the first 4 steps, there's also a kind of progression. Everything here is progressive within this whole thing here. So according to this then, it is possible to complete the body contemplation of the Satipatthana Sutta simply by contemplating the breath. That is all you need to do. Now, for those of you who know the Satipatthana Sutta, you will know there's all kind of things in there. It starts off, how does it start off? It starts off with the breath, actually. And after the breath, it has the mindfulness and clear comprehension, I think, and then you have the 4 postures, then you have the 31 parts of the body, then you have the elements, and finally you have the cemetery contemplations. And even just the cemetery contemplation has 13 subsections, something like that? There's a large number of subsections. Or is it 10 or is it 9? Is it 9? Okay, 9, thank you. So lots of subsections right there. But what is interesting is that breath meditation is the only thing that you actually have to do. It is sufficient in fulfilling everything else. And that's kind of interesting. Yeah, you don't have to be too concerned about all of these other ones. There is a very interesting study done by Bhante Sujato called The History of Mindfulness. It's kind of his, I would call it his most important book, perhaps. It's maybe hard to, I would think it's the most important and maybe the most interesting one in many ways, and maybe the most the one that brings out the most new information that you may not find anywhere else so easily. And what he does there, he kind of looks at the Satipatthana Sutta from a historical perspective, and he asks whether there has been like a development of the Satipatthana Sutta by comparing it to various versions and etc., etc. And when he does that, he concludes that in the Kaya Nupassana of the Satipatthana Sutta, the most original part, the most likely part to be where the Buddha started, is the 31 parts of the body. That is the most likely beginning point. And that is that brings up a lot of interesting questions, because if that is the first part, what happened to the breath? I'm just saying that the breath completes it. So if that is the most, so what is going on there? So the first thing to notice is that it is 31 parts of the body, not 32. Usually when I ask, I haven't asked you, but maybe you are too educated to fall into this trap. I'm always trying to trap you, you see. Always trying to see if I can get the better of you. So this is kind of my naughty side. So I always ask, how many parts of the body are there? I ask people. And usually people say 32. That's the usual answer that you get. But actually, 32, that is from the commentaries, from the Visuddhimagga in particular, says there's 32 parts. Whereas in the suttas, there's only 31. The famous brain has been added in the Visuddhimagga. So the brain is missing in the suttas. So that means you don't have to contemplate the brain. Is that what it means? Of course, you contemplate the brain as well. It's just that it's not mentioned. Doesn't mean you shouldn't contemplate it. But what is interesting about this is that so much of what we understand to be Buddhism is actually the commentarial view of Buddhism. That is kind of what it is about. You see this here in that everyone knows the 32, not the 31 parts. You see it in many different areas. You see it in the usage very often of vocabulary. People talk about kilesa rather than upakilesa, even though the word kilesa is more a commentarial term. Upakilesa is the sutta term. You see it in, where else do you see it? You see it in the vocabulary for meditation. Sometimes where people will use words like apana samadhi, or upachara samadhi, and kanika samadhi. All of these are commentarial terminology, but very commonly used in the contemporary Buddhism, etc., etc., etc. And so it's useful to know that a lot of what you may have learned, if you haven't read the suttas directly, may be commentarial terminology. And that may be perfectly okay. Most of the time it is perfectly fine, there's no problem with it, but occasionally it may be a slightly biased or one-sided view of things, for example, because the commentaries, the moment you define things, the moment you interpret, you are taking a kind of a side, you're taking a particular position. Just like me, when I speak, everything I say is a particular position. So, that's why you should be careful with everything I say. If you should be careful with the commentaries, you should be far more careful with what I say. It's like commentaries, sub-commentaries, sub-sub-commentaries, sub-sub-sub-sub-commentaries, and then kind of my speech way down there. It's kind of building on each other like this. And so this is why we should always be on the lookout. What I say is obviously also a commentary. So when I criticize in the commentaries, I'm kind of criticizing myself at the same time. So guaranteed that the things you hear from me too are going to be a certain angle, a certain slant, a certain bias on these teachings. So please keep that in mind. But my point is just that it's useful to remember that what we learn in Buddhism is not directly what comes from the suttas. So then back to the Satipatthana Sutta. Why is it that the 31 parts of the body is the original and not the mindfulness of breathing that you would expect? Because here it says that mindfulness of breathing fulfills the 4 Satipatthanas. So what is going on there? And what is going on is that one of the strange things about the Satipatthana Sutta is that mindfulness of breathing is only mentioned under body contemplation. Yeah, that's the only place where you find mindfulness of breathing. When you go to the contemplation of feelings, the contemplation of mind, the contemplation of dhammas, the principles, there's nothing about the mindfulness of breathing there. It's only under body contemplation. And yet, in the Anapanasati Sutta, we say that mindfulness of breathing fulfills the entirety of Satipatthana. Yeah, all 4 Satipatthanas are completed by watching the breath. And so it seems like there's something funny going on about the Satipatthana Sutta. Why is it only in the first one? It's as if something is missing. And for that reason, it may very well be that it was added later on to the first one. But actually, maybe it should have been kind of added to all of them or something like that to be complete. So it is kind of a partial exposition almost of how Anapanasati relates to Satipatthana practice. And so for that reason, it is not unreasonable to think that actually it does not belong there, because it belongs to the entire Satipatthana. Am I making sense to anyone? What I'm saying, does it make any sense? Yeah, it makes sense to you? Okay, yeah, good. Dirayupa, makes sense?
You meant that, suppose, Satipatthana Sutta and Anapanasati Sutta were the words, the actual words of the Buddha in early Buddhism. So suppose they were real. So it means that original teachings is in fact Satipatthana Sutta with lots of details, and Anapanasati is in the Satipatthana Sutta.
Yeah, something like that. So my point is that the Satipatthana Sutta originally may only have had the 31 parts of the body under body contemplation, nothing about the breath. But when you come to the Anapanasati Sutta, that is where it tells you that actually doing Anapanasati is enough to fulfill the Satipatthana. So it may not have been actually mentioned at all inside the Satipatthana Sutta. Instead, it is mentioned in the Anapanasati Sutta. Yeah, so that's something like that. So, but the main point is just that Anapanasati fulfills the 4 Satipatthana. That's the main point. But because it is found only in the first Satipatthana, only under body contemplation in the Satipatthana Sutta, it means that very commonly in the world, when you practice Satipatthana, you start off by just doing Anapanasati for a short while. Then you move on to experiencing sensations in the body. This is very common, in many of these so-called Vipassana techniques. I don't like to call it Vipassana because I think this is just labeling. You label things in a certain way, but whatever. But that is what happens when you read the Satipatthana Sutta in isolation. If you read just the Satipatthana Sutta, that is the outcome. Anapanasati, then after doing that for a while, you calm the mind, then you go on to sensations in the body, and you call that Vedananupassana, and then you move on in this particular way. But actually, that is not really, the main suggestion by the Buddha is to use mindfulness of breathing all the way. And the contemplation of feelings actually happens through the mindfulness of breathing, as we shall see shortly. Okay, so let's get into the details here. So, starting by breathing in heavily, this is digang. Digang literally means long in Pali, like the long breath. So you start with a long breath. Or heavily, I think the idea here is just to get the English idiom a bit more precise. So you have a long breath or a heavy breath, and then as your meditation kind of progresses, it becomes a bit more light. You kind of settle down a bit, I suppose, so it becomes lighter over time. There's a progression here. And so you know that you're breathing in heavily. You will notice you don't do this. There's nothing here about you make yourself breathe a long breath or a heavy breath. You don't make yourself breathe a light breath or whatever. You just are aware that this is the nature of things. And so the reason why there is a sequence here is not because you make the breath in this way, but because this is the natural way that the breath expresses itself as the meditation progresses. Yeah, it starts to be with more heavy and more long, and becomes lighter over time. That's kind of the idea behind this. And so you are simply aware of what is happening physically to the breath. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you focus on this particular aspect of the breath either. It's not that you focus on this aspect. You are just aware of the breath. And by being aware of the breath, you will know indirectly or directly or whatever that it is long or it is short. It is really just an awareness of the breath. It's not as if you think, oh yeah, is it long now or short now? I wonder. The moment you go like that, you lose it. Yeah, that's kind of not the point of the breath meditation. The moment is just to be aware of the breath, and okay, then it happens to be long and short as you are aware of it. It's so easy to misunderstand these instructions, and I know so many people who get them wrong and to think that you have to create the long breath and all these kind of things. That is not what it is about. And if you kind of follow the instructions here, just being mindful, then hopefully you will not fall into that particular trap. And then you can see it and shifts a little bit. First of all, you know that it is heavy and light, and now then you practice like this. I will breathe in, experiencing the whole body. And so again, when it says practicing here, I think sikati, I think is the Pali word, and if you use the word practice, does not mean that, again, that you try very hard. What it means is that it takes time to get to these stages. It takes a while before you can experience what is called here the whole body. Yeah, it does not. So you practice means you wait. It means you are patient. You allow the meditation to develop. That's really what it means here to practice, not that you do it in any particular way. And again, we will see this in the next sutta. So what is it that you are practicing? You're practicing, I will experience in the whole body. Sabbakaya patisangvedi. Patisangvedi means feeling, experiencing. Sabbakaya, whole body. What does that mean? I thought we were doing breath meditation. Whole body. It's interesting. And this is one of those things. Yeah. How do you interpret this again? What does it mean in this context? Sabbakaya. And so here the Pali word kaya is actually a very fluid word that means many things. The main meaning of the word kaya is actually the living body. Not just body, but the living body, the sentient body is the main meaning of the word kaya. But it also has the kind of fundamental meaning of any group of phenomena. Group of phenomena coming together. And in the Anapanasati Sutta, I think, to me, the obvious meaning is that it means the whole body, means the whole breath. The breath as a group of phenomena. All phenomena of the breath are called the kaya of breath, the group of breaths. And so what this means, in my opinion, here is the whole breath. Because we're doing breath meditation. Yeah, that's why it means that. Moreover, when you come to the further down the sutta, it says that the breath is a body among bodies. And because it says that specifically in the sutta, it seems to be saying that we're dealing here with the breath. Finally, the commentary defines it in this way. It says sabbakaya in this case means the breath. The kaya means breath in this particular case. So with this interpretation, it means the whole breath. So in other words, it means that your awareness is expanding a bit. You're becoming more peaceful. You're seeing more of the breath. You're not just seeing that it is long or short. You're not just have a short glimpse of it, but you're becoming more aware of the entirety of the breath. Maybe the beginning and the end, or how it fluctuates and these kind of things. So your mindfulness is becoming more powerful at this point. So this is kind of the idea here. Yeah, you can see that what is going on. Your mind is becoming more refined. The mindfulness is increasing. Yeah, the stillness of the mind is already starting to happen. And you'll be experiencing pleasant states already, even when you're becoming aware of more of the breath. Already that is a pleasant state, provided you don't use any force or willpower to do it. It's just the natural expansion of the awareness, which happens by itself when the mind is inclined in the right direction, when there is less defilements in the mind, when the mind is less distracted by external things, etc. Some people do interpret this to mean the whole physical body. And does it really matter? It may not matter that much. As long as you're becoming more peaceful, as long as the mind is kind of developing in the right way, that is the most important thing. So maybe it can be used in that way, but I would say that here, to me, it seems very obvious that it is about the breath meditation. Then finally, we come down to the practice. Practice like this. I will breathe in, stilling the physical process. Physical process is kaya sankhara, and kaya again, body or breath or whatever. Yeah, it could be breath here. He calls it physical. And sankhara, in this case, kaya sankhara means something like maybe activity. Yeah, activity is like sankhara is a doing, so it's like an activity in a sense. So it can mean the breath activity. So one way of understanding this, which is very obvious, is as stilling the breath activity. Then it becomes very obvious what is meant here. And elsewhere in the suttas, kaya sankhara is actually defined as the breath. So we know that is certainly a right interpretation of this word. So what is the difference between stilling the breath activity and stilling the physical process? Well, basically it's the same thing here. Because the physical process that is prominent at this point, and the only one you will really experience, is the breath. So these are really the same thing here. There may be a little bit more to the physical process, but basically it is the breath. And of course, as you are calming down the breath, all the rest of the physical processes will also calm down at the same time. Heartbeat will go down, the blood will circulate more slowly perhaps, everything will kind of calm down. Your thinking will certainly calm down, and everything will become more kind of easy and natural because at this particular point. So physical process is certainly not wrong, but I think also the breath activity also is perfectly acceptable translation at this particular point. So you can see here, you're stilling the physical process. And this idea of stilling, pasambati is the Pali word here, is one of the hallmarks of the entire meditation process. And as we go through this process, all the 16 steps of Anapanasati, this idea of stilling and calming comes back again and again and again. Deeper and deeper and deeper degrees of stilling until you don't believe you can become more still. Until, of course, you enter the jhana states where the world stops. Everything is completely still. Time basically comes to an end. When there's no movement, time also kind of changes. Time stops rather. So this is kind of one of the hallmarks of this whole process. You will see there are certain things that kind of you see again and again and again. And this is one of those things that you see there all the way through. Another thing that you will see, and which is not mentioned so far, is the depth of the joy and happiness that you experience, the bliss that you experience. Already at this point, you are very likely to feel a certain sense of gladness or joy inside. Already you're feeling really good. At the very least, you will feel deeply peaceful already, and actually already is very nice. And so this is one of the other hallmarks, the gradual profundity and depth of the joy and happiness that you experience, moving on and on and on, deeper and deeper and deeper as you go through this process. So there's a number of things like this that happens. The energy is another one. The energy becomes more and more powerful. Not the restless kind of energy that we normally experience, but the natural energy of the mind. The mind feels empowered. Mindfulness is increasing all the way through here. It becomes sharper and sharper as you go through this. I did say that we establish mindfulness first. That is true. But also, mindfulness also becomes sharper as you go through this process. So many of these things come together. Vipassana becomes sharper and sharper as you go through this. If vipassana means clear seeing, then the clarity of your seeing is developed as you go through this process because mindfulness is stronger. So all of these good qualities that we're trying to develop on the path kind of happen and arise and develop as an outcome of this practice. So that is the complete body contemplation according to the Anapanasati Sutta. Does that mean we should not bother with the contemplations of the Satipatthana Sutta? Not necessarily. Can do those as well. It's really up to you. You can do like the 4 elements, yeah? See your body as the 4 elements. See how your body kind of arises out of the physical world. You are nothing, and suddenly it is there. This body, this is kind of nice in the suttas, the body built up of rice and porridge. Isn't that kind of nice? My body is a bit of other things as well, potato and salmon and that kind of stuff, because I was born in a non-rice country. The kind of there's not so much rice in Norway. There's more like wheat and potatoes. But our bodies is basically that, and that rice and potato comes out of the ground. We're kind of built out of the environment, yeah. And then we go back to the environment again. Yucky here. What is this stuff? Yeah, built out of all these things. How interesting can it possibly be here? Right? It does not take that much contemplation to realize, at least momentarily, that this is not interesting. Of course, then the interest comes back again very easily as well. There's this fluctuation. That's the problem. But it can be helpful in meditation. A little bit of that contemplation can help you to let go a little bit of the body, and that will deepen your meditation. And that is the purpose of that. So there can be this dynamic and this kind of mutual support between the breath meditation and a little bit of body contemplation. 4 elements is a great way of contemplating. You can also do the 31 parts of the body, and that kind of gives rise to yuck factor pretty quickly if you do that, because it's, it's not, undigested food. We just had breakfast, you can kind of almost see it kind of going through the system, and all of these things. Yeah, it's not nice. And, the fact that beauty is only skin deep is literally true. Yeah, take the skin off and it's not so beautiful anymore. It's at the very best, it's neutral. So it gives us an antidote, and this antidote actually matters because very often the reason why we are blocked in our meditation is precisely because of attachment to the body and the 5 sense world. So we can use those, but use it be reasonable about it. Don't become so upset with your body that you end up committing suicide or anything like that. There's a story about that in the suttas, about monks who committed suicide because they were so fed up with their own body. Okay, enough of this body, and they committed suicide. And the Buddha said, whoa, hold on, okay, mindfulness of breathing, yeah. Better do that instead, because this is not working out as it was intended. Yeah. Okay. So I'm ending on a good note right there. So let's stop there, and please keep on enjoying yourself and have a nice lunch. And we'll see you back at 3 o'clock this afternoon.